Mary owned a small lamb. Mary owned a small portion of mutton. Mary ate a small lamb. Mary ate a small portion of mutton. Mary gave birth to a small lamb. Mary gave birth to a small portion of mutton. Mary had sex with a small lamb. Mary had sex with a small portion of mutton. Ambiguity is extremely entertaining and just as problematic. Ambiguity refers to the state of having more than one possible meaning or being open to interpretation. Ambiguity itself is ambiguous because it can either mean the state of many-meaning-ness or a state of uncertainty or dubiousness. So let's disambiguate or clarify what type of ambiguity this video will be dealing with. We will not be looking at the ambiguity that is dubiousness or uncertainty. For example, some stories and movies have ambiguous endings, which leave us wondering what the resolution really is. This is the kind of ambiguity that we will not be discussing. If you want a separate video on that, do let me know. We will instead be looking at cases where words or sentences could justifiably mean more than one thing. Now that we've cleared up what kind of ambiguity we'll discuss, let me further clarify by telling you what ambiguity is not. Ambiguity is not vagueness or underspecification. These three ideas are often confused, so let's make the demarcations clear before getting into the meat of the matter. Vagueness. This is a lack of precision or exactness of meaning. Something can be vague, while not at all ambiguous. He is tall. That is a little vague, but it's not ambiguous. It's vague because tall doesn't have a precise meaning. Where does tall start or end? Is 1.8 meters tall? What about 1.7? If you have a tall stack of bricks and remove one brick at a time, at what point is it no longer tall? Of course, I couldn't write tall on the section of my health form that asks for height. I'm at the bank over on 3rd Street isn't too vague, but it can be quite ambiguous if there's both a riverbank and a financial bank there. In such a case, I would have two distinct meanings to choose from. Imagine vagueness versus ambiguity like this. Each whole number is a distinct meaning. So I say a word, which this piece of tissue represents. The meaning could be 7 or it could be 8. You know it's either 7 or 8. But neither meaning is by itself ambiguous, but the fact that there are two possible meanings creates that ambiguity. In the case of vagueness, you get a tissue with only one side, but it's 7.5. So it's vague. It's not quite 7 and it's not quite 8. You don't have any choices to make in terms of meaning, but the one meaning you have is somewhere in the gray. So vagueness is certain uncertainty, while ambiguity is uncertain certainty. Now let's have a look at underspecification. Something can be underspecific but unambiguous. For example, I'm visiting my brother tomorrow is not very ambiguous, but if I have two brothers, then it's not specific enough. I'm visiting my brother John tomorrow would be more specific unless both my brothers are named John. So enough talking about what we are not talking about. Let's get on to the ambiguity that we are here to discuss, which we can broadly call linguistic ambiguity, since it has to do with words. We'll look at three broad types of this kind of ambiguity: lexical, syntactic, and pragmatic. Lexical ambiguity. A lex is a specific form of a word, or one of possibly several iterations of a lexeme. For example, run is a lexeme. Different lexes or form of run are running and ran. Lexical ambiguity has to do with words or phrases being open to more than one legitimate interpretation. With this in mind, a single word can be lexically ambiguous. All it takes is for that word to have more than one meaning. If these meanings are within the same word class, for example, if they're all nouns, then the ambiguity is even more likely. For example, bat is itself ambiguous. It is many nouns and a few verbs. Let's consider, for the sake of this example, that bat has only 3 meanings. the animal, the sports instrument, and the verb that means to use said instrument to hit a ball or someone annoying. I want a bat is ambiguous. It could mean that I want the animal, perhaps as a pet, or it could mean that I want a cricket bat or baseball bat or something like that. I want to bat is unambiguous, since ignoring the obscure meanings, bat only has one meaning as a verb. So, words that are inherently ambiguous aren't necessarily ambiguous in usage. This same concept applies to phrases. It's a piece of cake can be literal, or it can figuratively mean that something is easy. Maybe I asked my friend who just won an eating competition, "How were the finals? What did you eat?" He answers, "It was a piece of cake." This is a clear ambiguity. And that was an oxymoron. And oxymoron is an oxymoron. Now for an example that doesn't rely on literality versus figurativeness. I'm making my bed can be ambiguous, especially if I am a carpenter displeased with the ready-made beds at the local shops. Context can either diffuse or intensify ambiguities. For example, if I hate sports and love nocturnal animals, then I want a bat isn't too ambiguous. This time, context diffused the ambiguity. In the case of my champion eater, the context served to amplify the ambiguity by making both interpretations reasonably plausible. Every day we hear and say ambiguous things, but usually context eliminates all possible meanings except the intended one. I might be getting down at a party with my friends on Saturday night, but if a bank robber comes in and shouts, "Get down!" no one who wants to live will start brandishing dance moves. Because there are some groups of words that have the same spellings but different pronunciations and meanings, called heterographs, some ambiguities appear in written language but disappear in spoken language. Some examples are does, doze, invalid, invalid, buffet, buffet, resign, resign, do, do, lead, led, bass, bass, sake, sake, and sometimes it just comes down to syllabic stress, although context usually makes the meaning clear, even if the wrong stress is uttered. For example, record or record, project or project, subject or subject, perfect or perfect, intern or intern. Enough on lexical ambiguity. Let's move on to syntactic ambiguity. This happens when there are more than one possible functions or groupings of words in a sentence. For example, I saw the man with the telescope could mean I used a telescope to behold the man, I beheld the man who had a telescope in his possession, I equipped my telescope with razor-sharp dragon teeth and cut through the man's body. But this meaning is much less plausible, so we'll ignore it. Let's look at the phrasal groupings for meanings 1 and 2. For meaning 1, I saw a man with a telescope. For meaning 2, I saw a man with a telescope. Now let's look at a few more examples. Pause the video after I read each one and try to figure out the ambiguity by yourself. The policeman shot the man with the gun. Look at the dog with one eye. They are cooking apples. John floated the boat between the rocks. Nothing is greater than eternal life. All that glitters is not gold. Gray hair remover. English teacher. Now let's have some fun with some actual newspaper headlines and signs. to crash your party, but we need to get to the third kind of linguistic ambiguity, pragmatic ambiguity. Pragmatic ambiguity deals less with the structure of sentences and more with their function. While a sentence's content meaning might be clear, meaning you know what every word is lexically and syntactically doing within that sentence, the meaning might still be ambiguous. Examples are a must. The cops are coming! This can be an exclamation of relief, a threat, a warning, or an alarm of panic, depending on who says it and what the situation is. We know what the sentence means, but we don't know what it means. Could you clean your room? Though structured as a question, this is likely a request or command. However, maybe my son is sick and I'm asking if he's physically able to clean his room. With pragmatic ambiguity, the best way to clarify is to provide context or to seek more context, depending on whether you're the communicator or communicatee. But in reality, tone of voice clears up most possible pragmatic ambiguities. I'm sorry you didn't learn manners when you were a child. This sounds like a sarcastic insult, but tone and context could make it an apology or extension of sympathy. Another road to pragmatic ambiguity is presupposition. This subset of ambiguities can land in some grayer areas among pragmatic, lexical, and syntactic ambiguity. Some words and phrases imply that we are supposed to assume something, but the trouble is, what we should assume might be one of several options. Again, context is everything. Let's look at a few examples. I like math too. Meaning 1. I, as well as someone else, like math. Meaning 2. I like something else, let's say English, and I like math as well. I like math too. Meaning 3. Math likes me, and I reciprocate that feeling, so I like math too. And meaning D. Not only do I hate math, but I also like it. I love you too is a similar structure and lends itself to 4 or more possible meanings that are very different from one another. There are many other categories and subcategories and sub-subcategories of ambiguity, but we have covered the very basics, and that's decent progress for just one video. How can we identify, disambiguate, and even prevent ambiguity? Or, more interestingly, how can we use ambiguity to our advantage? Let me know if you need a sequel. Thanks for watching.